Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a day late on Psalm Wednesday. We're doing it Psalm Thursday. Hopefully, next week we'll get back to Psalm Wednesday. We think we know what the problem is with our leak, and it should be fixed pretty soon. Boy, I hope we're right on what it is because it'll be a much easier fix. Psalm 14. Schofield Ministries presents to you Psalm 14, Fallen Man and a Faithful God. This psalm is simply titled to the chief musician, Psalm of David. With this title, we have the author, who's, of course, David, and the attendant audience, the chief musician. That we can take to represent more than just the choir leader such as Asaph. Maybe it looks to the ultimate musician of the universe, God himself. G. Campbell Morgan said the thought of the whole psalm is the safety of the safety of godliness and the peril of ungodliness. The human race is foolish, the human race is corrupt, and it is fully foolish, fully corrupt. This puts aside any thought that anyone that has ever been born, that walked on this planet except for Jesus Christ, can choose for God. The Lord will destroy these people for their actions. The psalmist longs for the establishment of the Lord's kingdom on earth. This psalm is also almost identical with Psalm 53. So whenever we get to Psalm 53, you may think, oh, I've heard this before. This is where it comes from. Verse 1, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have committed abominable deeds. There is no one who does good. Look at this triplicate incitement against humanity. No God, corrupt, committed abominable deeds. I guess it would be 4 actually. No one who does good. The fool. David affirms God's indictment on the human race. They are fools. Now, the fool here, which typically means vain, empty-headed, this one means more, the fool is one who is morally perverse, not mentally deficient. He is the one who is morally insensitive and impious. And impious means no reverence, no respect for God. It can mean atheism in this respect, but it can also mean someone who just does not acknowledge God. They turn their backs on God and just said, hey, there is no God in my life. This can go to the pagans who don't worship the true God. Now, they may worship other gods, which means they are not atheists, but there is no one true God. Their behavior is no good. Their beliefs, no God. His is more of a practical than a theoretical atheism. In his life, he is living it like there is no God. Now, there's also, this goes to those that say there is no God. Those that live their life like there is no accountability in any way for their actions. They act aggressively. They flout their independence from God and his commandments. To give you an idea, what is the opposite of a fool? One who has wisdom, one who understands. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. In his heart, in his innermost being. Now, his actions probably don't act like it. How many people that say they're an atheist, whenever something bad happens, they'll say, or something good happens, they'll say thank God without even thinking about it. A lot of them who don't believe in God will say, God help me in the worst of circumstances, because that is just a natural part of man. David looks at those who deny the existence of God and comes to the conclusion, they are fools. Morally, primarily, intellectually, secondary. This is not those who are not smart enough to figure God out. No one is that smart. Those who just simply reject God, and rejecting maybe to the nth degree, which is saying there is not a God, are those that reject God and just simply say God has no place in my life. From the italics in the New King James Version, we can see that the fool actually says, no God for me. Not only does he not believe in God, he also acts on these convictions. David said this because of the plain evidence there is a God, evidence both in creation and human conscience, as Paul described in Romans 1. The fact that some men insist on denying the existence of God does not erase God from the universe. Paul wrote in Romans 1:22, professing to be wise, they became fools. The Hebrew word for fool is, in this psalm, is the Hebrew word Nabal. It is a word that implies an aggressive perversity. Take your Bibles, turn over to 1 Samuel 25:25. This name should be familiar. 1 Samuel 25:25. Now, the context is David's men have been watching the land of a man by the name of Nabal. When they ask for something, he treats them horribly. Horribly. When David finds out about it, he gathers the young men together and they're going to go destroy every male on his property. And I mean every male, from the baby to the oldest. Verse 21. Let's go back to verse 21. Now David had said, "Surely in vain have guarded all that this man has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. May God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave as much as one male of any who belong to him." Verse 23, when Abigail saw David, she hurried and dismounted from her donkey and fell on her face before David and bowed herself to the ground. And she fell at his feet and said, "Oh, on me alone, my Lord, be the blame." I don't know, I've never read, but this almost sounds like a type of Christ. On me alone, my Lord, be the blame. What did Christ say on the cross? You don't forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. What did Stephen say whenever he was being stoned? Lay not this sin to their charge. Please let your maidservant speak to you, and listen to the words of your maidservants. Verse 25, please do not let my Lord pay attention to this worthless man Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young man, my Lord, whom you sent. So here she is interceding on the part of all the men in her, where she lives. It's interesting. I've never thought about it that way. Maybe totally off on that, but I think that's an interesting idea. The God-denying man is a fool, and this is what David Guzik has to say. Why is he a fool? He denies what is plainly evident. You just look around the world and how can you deny that there is a God whenever you look at the wondrous things? Whenever you look at the human hand, whenever you look at the human eye, how can you deny? I heard one, I think he was a former evolutionist and became a creationist. He said one of the big things about not believing evolution is the simple fact that even if we say it took 14 billion years, that's still not long enough. Whenever you look at the miracle of the human body, it would take much more than 14 billion years of evolution to create something that intricate. He believes in tremendous effect with no cause. He denies first cause. Everything has first cause. The computer, the phone, or whatever you're watching this on had a first cause. And that first cause goes back to the guys that built it. Then it goes back to the guys that manufacture the parts. Then it goes back to the parts, how they were created, whether it was elements out of the earth or something that was man-made. Everything has a first cause. Stephen Hawking, one of the big things is we don't understand gravity. We don't know where gravity comes from. We just really don't know anything about gravity. Where did gravity come from? Well, we don't know. Well, he said gravity exists because without it, things couldn't happen. Well, that's not first cause. Where did gravity come from? Big Bang. There's a spark of matter that exploded. Well, where would that matter come from? First cause. A fool denies a moral authority in the universe. Everyone knows. Even though they may try to block it somehow, it is wrong to murder. It is wrong to steal. It is wrong to lie. Those are universal morals that we all have in us. He only believes what can be proven by scientific method, which is one of the dumbest things in the world. Scientific method can't prove love, can't prove laughter. What is funny for one person is not funny for another thing. Scientific method can't explain that. He takes a dramatic losing chance on his supposition that there is no God, or that he doesn't have to pay attention from God. He refuses to be persuaded by many powerful arguments for the existence of God. Now, these arguments do not 100% prove the existence of God, but it should get you thinking, wait a minute, What's called the cosmological argument. The existence of the universe means there must be a creator God. As we said, there's got to be first cause. Who was the first cause? Now, I have read and seen it's like, well, who made God? That's the reason he's God. Nobody made him. He's always existed. The teleological argument, the existence of design in the universe, means there must be a designer God. Think about it. If the earth was 1 degree closer to the sun, we'd burn up. If the earth was 1 degree farther away, we'd freeze. Look out the beauty and balance in the universe that he has created. The anthropological argument, the unique nature and character of humanity, means there must be a relational God. Why did God make us with an awareness? Why? I mean, even the fool would say God didn't make us, we evolved. How did we evolve an awareness of religion? I mean, I can understand we need to make tools because tools help make a better life. But God? Why would we evolve a belief in God? How would that evolve? The moral argument. The existence of morality means there must be a governing God. And that goes back what I was saying before. We know murder is wrong. We know lying and stealing. We know that adultery is wrong. Now, many, like I said, try to stuff that down and not recognize it. But it's true. People know it is wrong to be with another person outside of marriage. Morgan says, what is cause and which is effect? Does atheism result from folly, or does folly from atheism? It would be perfectly correct to say that each is the cause and each is the effect, though I would have to lean towards folly coming from atheism. David found not only what the fool said to be significant, where he said it, in his heart, the innermost of his being. The God-denying man David has in mind is not merely troubled by intellectual objections to the existence of God. In his heart, he wants God to go away. God, I don't want you to be here. I don't want you to have any influence. I don't want you to have any effect. That's what the fool is saying. John 3:20. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deed should be exposed. That's why true Christians are hated in this world, because we are the light exposing their darkness. This means that the man David had in mind doesn't have to be an atheist. Honest intellectual agnosticism does not necessarily produce immorality. Dishonest emotional atheism always does. I want to be separate from God. I don't want to be God. That leads to immorality. When we speak with one who denies God, we should not only say or even primarily speak to his head, but we should speak to his heart. It's his heart that's the problem. Spurgeon said, let the preacher aim at the heart and preach all the conquering love of Jesus, and he will by God's grace win more doubters to the faith of the gospel than any 100 of the best reasoners who only direct their arguments to the head. Apologetics is very important. If you've not heard the term apologetics, it means a defense of the faith. And we are to make a defense of the faith. But remember, the head does not make a Christian. The heart makes a person a Christian. The phrasing of said in his heart also reminds us that it is possible for one to say in his mind that there is a God, yet deny it in his heart and life. I think a majority of atheists, it is their heart that says there is no God. And their heart is doing the best to convince the head that he doesn't exist. One may believe in God in theory, yet be a practical atheist in the way he lives. 1 Samuel 27:1 tells us what David said in his heart on one occasion. Now I shall perish someday by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me that I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines, and Saul will despair of me. So to seek me any more in any part of Israel, so I shall escape out of his hand. Was this not David, in some sense, also denying God and speaking as a fool? This is a type of being a fool. Instead of trusting in God, God's going to make you, David runs. He runs to the Philistines and hides there. So shall I escape out of his hand. Not God delivering, but David delivering himself. Now, we all do this. I'm not saying David's a bad guy for doing this. We all do this. They are corrupt, ruinous, They do destructive acts of the wicked. They have done abominable works. They have committed abominable works. Detestable acts done out of a complete disregard for the majesty of God's kingship and his revealed law. A fool believes that there is no God and leads a corrupt life. He lives a life separated from the wisdom revealed in God's word. There is none who does good. Simply put, without faith, no one can please God. There are none who do the good that God requires. What is the good that God requires? Perfection. If you're perfect, then you're good. You mess up one time at any point in your life, you've lost that perfection. This is a complete absence of godliness because you're replacing it with your own goodness. As David considered the sin of the God denier, he looked out over the landscape of humanity and concluded, there is none who does good. We're not talking about human good. I mean, the cure for penicillin was a great good, but it wouldn't get you into heaven. The cure for polio, that was fantastic, but it's not going to get you into heaven. The cures that were coming for cancer, those that feed the hungry, food banks all over, which are great. Those are good works. Habitat for Humanity, a good work, but none of that gets you into heaven. None of that is pleasing to God because it is done in our fallen human state. We are born with both the will and the capacity to do evil. Think about children. No one has to teach a child to do bad things. They know it. They know they've done bad things. We were in a restaurant a couple of days ago, and they had, certain booths were taped off because they're not supposed to be there because of COVID and everything like that. There's separation. And this father said something to his child, and that child ran straight for that booth under that tape to get in that booth, and Daddy got up, and the first thing that child said was, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Didn't have to teach him how to do bad things. He knew he had done wrong. He knew all along it was done wrong. The path of least resistance usually leads us to do bad, not to do good. It is often easier to encourage others to do bad things instead of good things. Many of our good deeds, and I would say most of our good deeds, are tinged with selfish, bad motives. We are doing it for what we can get out of it, what is best for us. How many give to charity so they can take it off their taxes, brag about it to others? Whenever we give in church, we got to be careful, because what does the Lord say? Don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing. This is no exaggeration. Every sin implies the effrontery of supposedly knowing better than God. That's one of the, I guess you could say, a periphery definition of sin. I know better than God, so I'm going to do it the way I want to. It is a corruption of loving evil more than good. We know what the good is. Even though we know it's wrong to lie, we know it's wrong to cheat, we know it's wrong to steal, but we still do it. We still do it. Wow. 18 minutes in and we just got verse 1 done. I don't think the other's going to take quite as long. Heaven's analysis of fallen humanity, verses 2 and 3. Verse 2, the Lord has looked down from heaven upon the sons of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. Verses 2 and 3 are cited by Paul in Romans 3. Romans 3, 10 through 12. As it is written, there is none righteous, not even one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become useless. There is none who does good. There is not even one. How many times did he repeat that? None righteous, none who seek for God, none who understands, none who does good. And I see not even one in verse 10, none in verse 11, not even one in verse 12. I think he's making his point. This is a support of the universal and perennial. It's going to last until the eternal state, the perennial sinfulness of mankind. The Lord looks down from heaven. The psalmist's evaluation in verse 1 is based on what the Lord has said when he examined his people. He looked down to examine, what is it called, the children of men, the sons of men. He looked down upon them. You notice it's sons of men, sons of men. Someone almost say, well, I guess women aren't. No, it was Adam. It's Adam's fault we're in this position. Remember that. Romans blames Adam. Even though Eve ate first, Adam was the one that was in charge. Adam is the head of the household. That's why it's the sons of men that are the ones, because we are the heads of the household and are supposed to be protecting our families from sin as best as God has allowed us. God never forgets about man. He is always forgiving, he's always forgiving, yes. He is always observing man. He is always looking down from heaven. Think about it. This is the Lord who looked down and saw the corruption of man before the flood. Everyone's heart was continually doing evil except for Noah and his family. This is the Lord who looked down and saw man's united rebellion against the Creator King at Babel. What were they doing in Babel? They were building a city and a tower to reach up to heaven. They were building their own religion. First, one world government. This is the Lord who heard the outcry of evil at Sodom and Gomorrah and worked on it. Upon the children of men, that is, sons of men, that is a symbolism for the whole human race. Men, women, children. A lot of people say babies are innocent. No, babies aren't innocent. Babies are born with a sin nature. If a baby dies I say this right, they deserve hell. Why? They got a sin nature. They sin. Think about how selfish babies are. They want to be fed when they want to be fed, and if they don't, they just sit there and cry. But God in His mercy, babies are immature. Babies don't know. Babies can't confess Christ. If something happens to a baby, they're automatically in the presence of God. Those who don't understand, they are automatically in the presence of God. So don't, if a baby passes away, still in childbirth, stillborn, I can't even remember what it's called, whenever they die in their crib death, they're in heaven. They're with God. You thank David for that saying, because whenever his first child was born, Bathsheba, a few days later, the child was dead because of his sin, which probably was the best for the child, because that child would have had a horrible life considering what he was born of sin because of David and Bathsheba. But David said, I can't go to him. He can't come to me, but I will go to him. And I'm pretty sure David made it up to heaven. In man's rejection of God, there's often the wish that God would just leave us alone. This is what stupid wish, unwise wish. All human life depends upon God. Acts 17:28. For in Him we live and move and exist. As even some of your own poets have said, for we are also His offspring. So if it wasn't God, we wouldn't live, we wouldn't move, we wouldn't exist. And then in Matthew 5:45, in order that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For He causes His sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. This is an impossible wish, because God has rights as a creator over His creation. The words remind us of God descending from heaven to observe the folly. We've already mentioned it, Genesis 11:5. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. Looking down upon the wickedness of the race prior to the judgment of the flood, He watches us. Of course, He is omniscient. He is omnipresent, so He can see at all times. It doesn't matter when it is. He can see. To see if there are any who understand, who seek God, who have wisdom. This is what God is looking to. Whenever He looks down from heaven, one of the things He is looking for, is there any understanding among humanity? Is there anyone who understands God and His purpose? And if we truly understand that, we would be seeking after Him. God is looking for those who are wise enough to look for Him. God's not looking for intellectual. He's looking for the heart. He's looking for as a more moral and spiritual judgment. If there are men who understand His heart and plan, they would seek Him for righteousness' sake, because of the simple fact they would understand He is the only source of righteousness. We deceive ourselves into thinking of a man on his own really does seek God. All religions, all rituals, all practices from the beginning of time indicates they are seeking, whether it's God, a higher power, whatever you want to call it. So aren't men seeking after God? No. Not in the least bit, not in any way. Excuse me. If man initiates the search, he's not seeking after the true God, the God of the Bible. He is seeking after an idol that he makes himself. He is seeking after the God that he wants to make. Spurgeon, in a sermon from Romans 3, you have gone through this form of worship, but you have not sought after God. I am sick of this empty religiousness. We see it everywhere. It is not communion with God. It is not getting to God. Indeed, God is not in it at all. Who seek God, unlike the actions of the fool, if we were truly wise, we would seek out God. Seeking God, living in accordance with his absolute standard of holiness, purity, and justice. Does anyone do that? No. Why? Because of the fact we want to live our own lives, do it ourselves. It's only when his Spirit grabs us, when his Spirit has convicted us, when his Spirit says, it is your time, and we believe in Christ. Whenever that happens, we are now, whenever we accept the Jesus Christ sacrifice on the cross, not because of Christ, not because of us, but because of Christ, we are now up to God's absolute standard of holiness, purity. We are found not guilty by God's justice. And if we are truly living this, we will become objects of persecution. We will become objects of abuse. We will become objects of affliction. And what happens? The Lord looks down, he sees his children, and he will deliver them. Verse 3, they have all turned aside. They have together become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. He's making sure this is repeated. They have all, the entire human race. There are no exceptions. This is the findings of the Lord when he looks down on man. The human race is guilty individually and guilty corporately. The race as a whole, whether you're talking about individuals, you're talking about nations, you're talking about cities, we have turned away from God, we have turned away from his word, and as the fools have said, we want nothing to do with God unless it's a God created in my image. When God looks, this is what he finds. Men have become corrupt. Poole says on the turned aside, they have grown sour, as this word signifies. We are like old milk whenever God looks at us. And this is, of course, us in our sinful state before accepting Jesus Christ. So whenever the majority of humanity now, God looks down, he is looking at sour milk. That's how he sees us before we come to Christ. He is overwhelmed by the evil that he sees. The Hebrews have the same word for sin and a dead carcass, and again the same word for sin and stench. They have all turned aside together. Well, go back to Genesis 11 and read the Tower of Babel. Let us come together. Let us build. Let us go against God. God says we have all become corrupt. All. We are all tainted. We're all guilty of total departure. We're all guilty of total defilement. There's no one. No one. There is no one who does good. No, not one. God's standards are absolute. Now, I keep saying no one. Of course, whenever David wrote this, the one had not walked on the planet. There was one person who walked on this planet who everything he did was good. Everything, every waking moment, he did the good that pleased God. Think it's fantastic? We end up nailing him to a cross. When God finds that none who do us good is because there are none. It isn't as if there was some and God couldn't see them. David observes and remembers that man is truly, profoundly, deeply fallen. David's use of there is none who does good suddenly broadens the scope. We're not just talking about the fool anymore. We're talking about us. At one point, we were all atheists. Why? Because we were living for ourselves. We were living separated from God without Jesus Christ. And whenever we were doing that, we were atheists because we were refusing the one God and putting ourselves up on that pedestal. But now, as we are let in on God's perspective, we see that we were included. No longer are we included. Now we can do good, but only through the Holy Spirit. And it's those good works that God has set up before us. Spurgeon says, "What a picture of our race is this! Save only where grace reigns. There is none that doeth good. Humanity fallen and debased is a desert without an oasis, a night without a star, a dunghill without a jewel, a hell without a bottom. No, not one." The only hope for the race the Scriptures teach is for individuals to turn to the Lord Jesus Christ for salvation. Verse 4, "Do all the workers of wickedness not know, who eat up my people as they eat bread, and do not call upon the Lord? Do all?" David was amazed at the ignorance of the evildoers. They do not know the Lord intimately, nor do they care about his looking down from heaven. Have all the workers of iniquity no knowledge? David first considered the profound fallenness of man. Now he deals with the fate of God's people in a fallen world. If they're relying upon their brains, even their brains should realize, look at nature. Look at this. This should be the first clue. Hey, there is a God out there somewhere. I mean, I need to understand about this God. But even their brains aren't working. Their brains are doing the best they can to get away from God. Who eat up my people as they eat bread? The wicked busily pursue self-interest, and in so doing devour God's people. Their hatred of righteousness and the vulnerability of the righteous combine to make the wise easy prey. Their appetite as they eat bread. Bread is one of the few, from what I've read, universal foods in this world. Now, not everybody eats hot dogs, but they eat the bread. Not everybody eats hamburgers, but they eat the bread. Not everybody eats pizza, but they eat the bread. Bread is all over. Bread's easy to make. Bread is plentiful. Bread fills you up. That is why their appetite is insatiable, and it's worldwide. I don't care if it's the wicked in the U.S., the wicked in England, the wicked in India, the wicked in Russia. They hate righteousness. They may not act like it, but down deep, because they are put themselves on their own pedestal, because they have denied Jesus Christ. They have hated right doing. It looks like the workers of iniquity are strong and have the upper hand. And that's what it looks like today. David wondered if the people of God are abandoned to the fools and corrupt of this world, to those who do not call on the Lord. They think they can devour freely God's people without any worry. What a description of the tribulation. What a description of what the Antichrist is going to do to the saints, the tribulation saints, during that 7-year period, particularly the last 3.5 years. Poole says, as they eat bread, with little regret or remorse, and with as much greediness and delight and constancy too, as they used to eat their meat. Think about it. Whenever you're eating pizza or whatever, do you even think about the bread that is made on? Maybe occasionally, but you're mainly thinking about the sauces, whatever toppings you put on it. As much with any foundation. The bread is the foundation for pizza. You don't think much about the foundation. All you're thinking about is the goodies that are given with it. They do not call on the Lord. Practical atheism is, of course, prayerless. Why would an atheist call upon the Lord? They express no remorse, no recognition of his judgment, no request for his mercy. Verse 5, for they are in great dread, for God is with the righteous generation. Why are they in great dread? Why are they in great fear? One reason is the reality why they're running away from God is they understand God will judge them one day for their actions. Their actions is devouring the righteous. And they don't want to be judged for that. Man is bold. Man is brazen in our unbelief. We strut across this earth for the short time we're here, but we strut across it like we control it. It is ours to do what we want. We don't want a God that one day is going to say, look, I gave you billions of dollars, and what did you do with them? Everything that was against me. You didn't fund, you didn't help, you used it for your own selfish purposes. Even if we're given very little on this planet, or we're giving immense wealth and resources, we all have responsibilities that we've been given as believers. Unbelievers, You can't say anything about them. They're blind, they're dead. Of course they're going to do what they do with their money, with their resources, with their items, with their time. Christians, however, it's a total different story. Whether you have $1.27 in the bank or you got 1.27 million in the bank, you have responsibilities that God has put before you. For God is with the generation of the righteous. David asked the question, hey, all the wicked are eating up the righteous. Now David answers it with great wisdom. He understands. The worker of iniquity may seem strong and confident, but they are actually in great fear. They can't erase the consciousness that God is with the generation of the righteous. That's why they hate us. That's what that phrase back from the book of John, they hate the light. They hate the generation of the righteous. Generation can also be translated as company, class, circle. That's why they hate the church. That's why so many of them right now are closing down churches, doing their best to close down churches with any means necessary. And unfortunately, we have been raised that if every Sunday we don't go to that building, sit and listen to that preacher for 20 minutes, sing our 37 hymns, listen to the announcements, we haven't been in church. Folks, Christ says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there also. Hebrews, can't remember the exact verse, it says that we are to fellowship with one another. It doesn't say fellowship with one another in a building, stained glass windows, maybe a couple little candles or something other. It just says fellowship with one another. George Whitefield. I would so recommend reading the life of George Whitefield. George Whitefield was what was called a new evangelist. He believed whenever he went into that church, preach, teach, and then give the salvation message. And I mean, the man gave it. He gave it so much that the churches stopped letting him in. Churches are like, no, you're supposed to come here, you're supposed to give a tame sermon, and then everybody leaves. And he didn't. Oh my goodness, he put it on the line. And he called evil, evil, he called good, good. There was nothing he held back. It got to the point where no church would take him, so he started meeting out in fields, town commons. A good friend of his, Benjamin Franklin, and everybody knows Benjamin Franklin. Two of them disagreed on a whole lot of things whenever it came to faith. But Benjamin Franklin even made the remark, whenever I was standing there listening to him, I was mesmerized by what he spoke. I remember reading one time, Ben Franklin said, they started passing the plate, and I said, nope, not given, nope, not given, nope, oh, here's the plate. And I emptied my pocket into the plate. Another time, after I'd emptied my pocket, my friend that was next to me said, look, I don't have anything, give me something to put in the plate. I just gave it all in the plate. George Whitefield was a master whenever it came to preaching and teaching. And he did it wherever he could, several times a day. A panic, this is Spurgeon, a panic terror seized them. They feared a fear, as the Hebrew puts it. An undefinable, horrible, mysterious dread crept over them. The most hardened of men have their periods when conscience casts them into a cold sweat of alarm. As strong as they might want to deny it, if they live under a cloud of knowing, they are battling against God and can never win. For God is with. He is in the presence. He is in the midst. He is among his people. So anytime a true Christian is there, so is God. So if you're afflicting the poor, afflicting the downtrodden, afflicting the weak, afflicting those who need special care, and they're believers, God is with them. God says, don't do that. Verse 6, you would put to shame the counsel of the afflicted, but the Lord is his refuge. You would put to shame. The wickedness is most pronounced on those who cannot defend themselves. And that's what the wicked do. That's what, big lawyers, whenever they're working, if they want to, let's say this huge company, they want to take that company down because of what they're doing. It's wrong, it's immoral, or whatever they do. A lot of times they don't go after that big company. They'll find a tiny company that may be doing something along the same lines. That tiny company does not have the resources that the huge company does, so they'll take that tiny company to court. They'll tear up that tiny company. They will get a precedent set in the courts. The judge rules against the tiny company. Then they start moving towards the big company because the courts have already said what they're doing is wrong. It makes it easier for them. That's what the wicked do. The wicked don't eat the powerful, even though most the powerful may be the wicked. They go after the little people because they're so much easier to take care of, so much easier to take advantage of. Now, Matthew 25, 31 through 46. This is basically a great tribulation verse because it's talking about how the Gentiles cared for the Jews during the great tribulation. Those that did not hide, did not feed, did not take care of the Jews during the great tribulation. Read it. You get an idea of how like I said, it is the great tribulation, but it gives you an idea of how we're supposed to take care of people. You can almost apply it to our time today. You shame the counsel of the poor, but the Lord is his refuge. David here announces it to the workers of iniquity previously mentioned, that they may work against the poor, but God has a refuge for them that cannot be breached. They are fighting against God and will never succeed.